Good morning. Thank you for coming back to the second session. And I'm still going to be aware that I'm being translated, so please, the translators, keep me right. If I'm going too fast, just wave over it. Thank you. Okay, and thank you. Big thank you for last night, giving me an opportunity to support a team that was going to win, which is unusual for me, so I appreciate you for organising that and for allowing me to support Switzerland last night. So that was good. And I'll be supporting against Argentina. So there we go. So to get on with today's session. Yesterday, we talked about theory. We talked about some leadership theoretical model that looked at leadership as a set of behaviours that can predict different psychological outcomes in your athletes. Okay? So today, we're going to try and do a little bit more of a practical application. So I know it's early, but I'm going to ask for you to think and get engaged in this session. So it's going to be less of me talking and hopefully more of you thinking and reflecting. Because really, you are the experts in your field. You know what your context is, your sport. You've been living your sport for your whole lives, and you're now into the position of coaching people, so you've accrued an incredible amount of knowledge about your sport and about people. And you accrue this knowledge by experientially learning your environment and what's happening and what's going on, and when some things work and some things don't work. And what we're going to try and do today is just draw out some of those key learnings that you've had from your sports. As coaches, you dedicate your lives to developing others. That's what you do. It's just accepted. And you just dedicate your lives to getting the best out of other people. And you develop these plans and, put in a whole lot of effort. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a lifestyle. It's not. You don't clock on at 9 and clock off at 5 Monday to Friday. It's a lot more than that. And what often gets left out is your development and your performance planning. You're very, very good at developing other people and developing athletes and maximizing their performance and getting the best out of them. But sometimes because, your lives are just so busy, there's so many things happening simultaneously, you're constantly putting fires out, you're doing strategy, you're doing tactics, you're dealing with emotions, you're dealing with the good emotions, the negative emotions, and just this world just goes, and it just keeps going and going and going. And what we try and do, we just try to stop that for a second and just reflect a little bit on certain aspects of that world. That's the ambition of what we're going to try and do today. This is coined in a leadership paradigm. And, typically, I do work in sport, business, and military education, and we talk about this concept of leadership. And, if we ask anybody in any organization across the world what is fundamentally important, and this word leadership emerges. It's always important, regardless of what context we're in, what organization, what sport. It's a word that's often used to describe something good or something bad. Okay, then the next obvious question is, okay, so what is it? That kind of gets a bit more of a silence in the room. What actually is leadership? We all use this word quite frequently. It was good leadership, there was no leadership, there was bad leadership. What exactly do we mean by that? I'm not going to answer that question because it's too difficult. But I'm going to allow you to answer it, because you have the experience in that domain, okay? So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and relate your experiences of your day-to-day lives to the model of leadership. So yesterday, we left off with those 7 behaviors, okay, that have often been used to describe what good leadership is. If all those 7 behaviors are present, you can be pretty sure you're doing a good job in the psychological aspect of leadership. Remember, that we're only talking about the psychological impact you have on your athletes, their emotions, their motivation, and their behaviors. Yeah, you've got a whole other raft of different roles that you engage in. We're just focusing in on motivation. I want to say a little bit about motivation because it's quite important. Motivation is two things. Quite simply, when you rip everything else away, there's two things at the heart of motivation. The first bit is what you do, often called direction, the choices we make. Do we go to the gym? Do we do this? Do we eat properly? Do we do the extra PT session? So the decisions that we make, that's first part of motivation. The second part of motivation is how much effort we put in when we make that decision. So when we go to the gym, do we really, really try hard? Do we absolutely put full effort into that situation? That's all it is. That is it in terms of what it is. Now you get lots of theories that will talk about why people make decisions and why people maybe don't put full amounts of effort in. And that's ultimately a much more difficult question. Okay? But we just want to sort of remember that it's two bits. When we strip everything else away, what we do, the choices we make, and the effort, the intensity which we engage in those activities. Okay. So what we're going to try and have a go at today is to try and develop your own personal performance plan. Either using those behaviors that we left with yesterday or ones that you develop, because remember, you are the experts in your field. You know, nobody knows your field better than you do. You know your athletes, you know your context, you've lived, breathed it for your whole life. We must use that information. I can't stand here and tell you what you should be doing in your particular roles, because I don't know your particular context. But what your job to try and do today is to take what we're talking about and adapt it to your situation. Yeah, to personalize it to what your context is and what you're doing and what's important in your environment. So I'm not going to give you the answers, unfortunately. You've got them all there, and we help to draw them out, hopefully. Okay. So there's a caveat. All the research that we talked about yesterday, so we know from doing research on transformational leadership across different contexts that coaches who are rated as more transformational by their athletes, they have happier athletes, more motivated athletes, better performing athletes, athletes that will make better decisions. We know that. That's quite a robust finding in the literature. Okay? However, you can probably rest assured that none of this research has been done in your particular context at your level. Okay, so we can't just lift it from here and dump it into your environment. Yeah, that's not going to work. You need to modify it and bespoke it and tailor it to your context. And that's really, really important that we recognize that. But we do want to make use of it, that we can use this as a guide to help us guide your behavior and guide the things that are important in your context. Okay, so we're going to map the literature to your knowledge base. So all we're going to do in this session is ask ourselves 4 basic questions. Okay, that's it, just 4 questions. Basic does not mean easy though. They're actually quite difficult questions when we start to unpick really the details of it, when we get into the details of these aspects of it. The first question is, what is important? What are the important skills, characteristics, and abilities in your domain? Okay, and I'm going to go through that in more detail. The second question is, what are you good at? So what skills as a coach, what skills are you very good at? Where are you maybe average? And where are you not so good at? So we're going to try and develop your development plan. Likewise, if you're working with your athletes, you want to know what they're good at, where their weaknesses are, and then how to plug those weaknesses, how to develop those. So we're just applying this to your context, okay, as a coach. Then the third question is, how are you going to get better at those limitations? Just like with athlete, how are you going to improve the athlete? What do they need to do to improve? You design that program for their improvement. So this, hopefully, today is just a little bit of a starting process for your improvement as a coach. Then the fourth question is, how do you know when you've improved? Okay, so how are we going to measure that improvement? Okay, that's it. That's what we're going to cover today. Then obviously, these are related here because these two concepts involve measurement. Yeah, involve trying to measure something in the environment, either by yourself, by peers, by athletes, by results. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail because that's absolutely fundamental. The sort of things that we are talking about in leadership and psychology present certain challenges to measurement. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward when we're trying to measure our athletes' performance. You know, we have objective measures, it's time, it's distance, it's score. You know, we've got really good measures, it's VO2 maxes, it's maybe lactate thresholds, whatever parameters we have there. But in psychology, measurement is a serious issue. We can do it, but it's quite a challenge. Okay. So what is important in your sport? Yeah, so this is just some ideas. I'm just putting some things up there to try and help us to guide our thinking. So your observations, your tacit beliefs, previously or currently successful coaches, the sports science team. So, you know, this is information that we can make use of to determine what is important in your sport. Yeah, so there's a whole raft of other things that we can look at for your particular context. And of course, there will be crossover. Yeah, so you'll share some things with other sports, but there'll be some things in your sport that actually is different. And that's why these things are important in your sport or your particular context. So the factors of influence, sport type, the level you're working with, the stage in the training cycle. Is it Olympic year? Is it the World Championships? Are we 2 years out? Are we 1 year out? Are we 1 month? Are we the day before? Are we 5 minutes before? You know, those sort of cycles, that'll contribute to determining what is important at that particular moment. Your own experience. You know, are you quite a new coach? Have you been coaching for a while? Where are you at with it? Your current relationship with athletes. If you've got a very good relationship, you can do a lot more with them. If your relationship is a little bit not so productive at that particular moment, well, you need to make that relationship a bit stronger before you can be really influential. So you maybe focus on developing the relationship and then getting on to developing other aspects of it. The gender, age of athletes, personality of athletes, and your personality. These are just some bits. There's a whole... So this is just to try and sort of create some understanding that there's a lot of factors that influence it, and this is a very difficult, fluid, moving world that we operate in. And all we're trying to do right now is just press pause for a second. We're just going to try and press pause on that world and try and unpick it and evaluate it a little bit. Okay? So exercise 1. What we're going to try and do is I want you to just take a couple of minutes and think about, so this is on one of the worksheets you have in your pack, and think about the best coach that you've ever had in your sport. Okay, somebody that has coached you. Some of you may have done something similar like this with your athlete, where they profile the best athlete in their domain, in their particular sport. You might have used something similar. This is just this process applied to your particular context. So you want to think of the best coach that you've ever had and think about what was it that made them so good? What made them stand out? What did he, she say to you? Yeah, what language did they use when they were talking to you? What body language did they use? How did they behave towards you? What did they do? Because they must have done something that made them special. They must have done something that made them that good. Yeah, so you want to try and delineate that. And you think, well, how did they make you feel? You know, what emotions did they arouse in you? They're not all good emotions, I bet. I bet some of them were quite challenging. Some of them were actually quite difficult to deal with. But that's part of that process. And then, lastly, what characteristics did they possess? Yeah, this one's a bit tricky, but we want to just explore those concepts as well. So these are just some bits there to help that thought process go on, because if we've never done this exercise before, it's actually quite difficult. Because as we talk about, life just goes on past us. It just happens. And we just, things happen. We suddenly feel a feeling, and we don't really know where that comes from unless we unpick the process, the cognitive factors and environment that's contributed to how we are right now. So how do we get to that point? And all we're trying to do is just unpick this a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about that, about the best coach you've ever had in your sport. Sometimes when I do this exercise, very rarely I have people that have never had a good experience. Not in sport, but in some businesses, I've never had a good leader. So if that is the situation, imagine that you're now choosing your boss or you're choosing your coach. Yeah, so we're flipping it over now. So you're now deciding who your boss is going to be. What characteristics, what job description would you write down for them? What would you like them to be like? How would you like them to treat you? Okay, so I'm just going to give you 5 minutes on that. If you just have a wee think and jot down some of those things there on this section here of the sheet. You can make use of those behaviors we talked about yesterday, or you don't. It's up to you. They might not be useful, they might be useful. Okay, when this list starts to populate, we want to try and fit them. These tasks get more and more difficult, okay, into these columns here. Okay, so this one's behaviors. This is what they did and what they said. This one's characteristics, so who they are, what experiences they might have had. this one's made you feel. So the emotions that they made you feel, whether like feeling valued, feeling confident, all those types of things in this box. And then we've got one at the right-hand side that's unsure. I really don't know where this one belongs, because it's a difficult thing to do. So we just try and populate that a little bit. And at this point, the language is going to interfere with this particular session here, because we'd normally share a little bit back and forward, but that's okay. What we're going to do is, after the session, you're going to share it with somebody else and talk about those aspects, because sometimes we don't know. You know, sometimes it's very difficult. Is this a behavior? Is this a characteristic? Because we can describe what somebody's like, but what makes them what they're like? Yeah, so, you know, and it's interesting to have those discussions. And sometimes we have them in an open forum like this, but it's probably more useful for this to happen after the session. Okay, and we can revisit this. This isn't the end of that particular aspect of it. So we're just going to move on now. I know that's not the ideal amount of time, but this hopefully you can take away and reflect on this when you get a moment. And I know you don't get very many moments to reflect, because we're very busy doing stuff. Okay, so this bit, I want you to try and choose the behaviors that you've written down. Yeah, and try and put them in order of importance for your sport and your context. Yeah, which one is the most important thing that they did? Then which one was the next most important? This is hard. I did say simple doesn't equate to easy. Remember, you're the experts in your area, so you can't be wrong. This is your opinions. This is what you do. Okay, so it's what's important to you, which is important. Okay, once we've got a fair idea of that importance, the order of importance there, and again, we're running through this real quick, so you can run through this on your own, in your own time, or maybe, you probably do something similar with your athletes to some extent, at times when you're adopting this process. This process it's called lots of things, but often it's the model of equal expertise. So that means that It assumes that we are the experts of our worlds. We're the experts of our lives. So when we're engaging with athletes, they're the expert in their world. Of course, as a coach, we have some additional knowledge that they don't have. That's why we're a coach, because we've got more experience, and we're mapping those two worlds together. Yeah, we're sort of trying to bring those two worlds into that process. Okay, so we've got a couple in there. I'm really not expecting you to have 10. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 is good for now. Okay, but if we're spending a long time on this, we'd try and populate this list as full as possible. So now the next question is, okay, so what are you currently good at out of those behaviors? What do you currently do very well? And implicitly within that, what do you currently not so good at? Or where might you need some help? And like, actually, I don't really know that inspiration stuff. You know, I'm not really sure how to do that. Or the high performer, I find it really difficult to shout at my athletes. You know, I don't like that, or really, really inspire them, or be really hard on them. I find that quite a challenge. So it's just trying to identify areas where we are good at something and not so good at something. Just like the athlete, you identify their strengths and weaknesses, and you work on those areas. You develop a program to work on those areas. This is the coach as a performer. This is you as a performer, as a coach. Okay, and this is your personal stuff. Nobody else sees this. This is an opportunity. It's not used for assessment. It's just purely used for development purposes. You know, it's not being used for selection or any of those types of things. So the first thing is, well, how do we measure it? And I've already suggested earlier on that measuring psychological constructs is difficult. It's a challenge. How do we know when we've achieved something? So I don't know if you use sort of psychological skills in your sports, like relaxation and imagery and self-talk and those sorts of things. They're notoriously difficult to measure. Yeah, because how do we know when we get better at them? What happens? You know, so I'm always trying to find innovative ways to do that. So, for example, relaxation, I'll try and get some physiological measure because they're theoretically more objective. So we'll put heart monitors on our athletes, we'll stress them out, and then we'll get them to see how quickly it takes them to get their heart rate back down to resting levels. So psychologically stress, not physically, obviously, because that's measuring something else. So we sort of, and then we can get some goals there. So then maybe the first time they do it, it takes them 1.5 minutes to get their heart rate back down. And then they go away and practice relaxation, they practice the breathing. The next time they stress them out, it might take them 1 minute, and so on. So it's just about trying to actually measure these aspects of it. Some things, you can't do that. You can't pair them up with something that's objective like that. And that's the challenge. So for your aspects here, how do we measure it? It is a serious challenge. How do we measure leadership ability? Is it athlete performance? Is it improvement? Is it motivation? Is it cohesion? Is it confidence? Is it how much the athlete likes you? Is it how much the athlete dislikes you? You know, where do we start? Where do we get into this measurement thing? And it's difficult, and there's no getting around it. But if we want to get better at something and set effective goals, we need to know where we're at now, and we need to know where we want to be in 2 months, in 3 months, in 4 months. You know, and measurement is implicit within that. Yeah, and getting good effective measurement tools. So the first place we're going to start, using the model of equal expertise, you are your own experts, is along the bottom here. You've already done the behaviors importance, so we put your behaviors in this section here, and the importance that you've got. And then you self-rate yourself. 10 is how good you'd like to be. And then, so this is your ideal level up here. And then you put where your current ability is, where you believe it to be. Yeah. So where you think, so out of those behaviors that were important, you fill up. So if you think, actually, providing reward, I'm really good at that, or making people feel valued, I think I'm good at that, give yourself a 10. If that, it's your opinion, you can't be wrong. This is your evaluation, it's your profile. But it is useful to try and be honest and reflect honestly within this process. So this is our importance by ability matrix. Because if we're actually going to do something different, because you're incredibly busy people, we want to make sure we work on the right thing. Yeah, we want to make sure we work on, if we're going to put energy and investment into changing behaviors, because that's in essence what we're talking about, we want to make sure that we're working on the right behaviors. And there's 2 bits of information we use for that. What's important and where am I going to get the biggest hits? Yeah, i.e. what am I not so good at? That's a useful place to start. Yeah, so it's 2 bits of information. This is what we're trying to do here. Okay? And it is really important we get this right, because if you're now going to invest time and effort in getting better at something, you want to make sure it's the right thing. Because we've only got so much time in every day, and we don't want to waste that getting better at something else. So this is why, we have to be careful with the literature. The literature is very useful for informing things. If you say, actually, my athletes sometimes, they're not as confident as I'd like them to be. And then you think, well, how do you develop confidence? What do you do to develop it? And we know as psychologists, we know how to develop confidence. It's what we spend a lot of our lives researching and testing and looking at. So we know factors in the environment that will help to get people's confidence up there. So this is where, as coaches, you'll make use of sports psychologists, you'll make use of experts in the field to plug those gaps, because you're experts in a whole range of areas. You're experts in the strategy, the skills, the development, the managing, the resourcing, the external relations, the making decisions on the spot. When an athlete suddenly challenges you, you've got to do something. What do I do? How do I behave? These are really difficult things to deal with. So, there's help available for those other aspects of it, So there's help available for psychologists for those aspects of it. So when we get into this situation, we now get a rough idea of where we're at. But is this really accurate? Do I want to check my thoughts with other people's thoughts? Because this is our self-reflection. If it's the first time we've done it, like anything, if we want to get better at it, we need to practice it. That's just how skill works. This is a skill. Self-reflection is a skill set. Drawing out the important things in the environment is a skill, and it requires time to do that. So we might want to think, actually, we've identified these things, so where else can I get information from? What other sources of information might be useful to help either triangulate where I'm at, or support it, or draw up areas? Because I might think I'm really good at inspiring people. Or I might think, in my lecturing situation, when I'm lecturing at university, I might think, I'm a really good lecturer, I'm brilliant at this, by the way. The students love the stuff that I do. And the students are sat there falling asleep. They're sat there, what's he talking about? He's totally lost me. So I need to check with them that I'm doing that job. I need to make sure I can think all these wonderful things, but really, it's the impact I'm having on the students that's a determinant of the effectiveness that I'm having. Kind of empowers them in some ways, because they are the judges of how good I am, essentially. So we can get athlete reports. We can maybe ask for a peer to observe us during some sessions, like another coach or somebody else to sort of, you can video your sessions or do a behavioral checklist, when you put these things down, to try and get frequencies there, so you get other people observing you. You get other coaches, maybe supervisors, maybe your coach development officers, maybe somebody in that situation. But absolutely fundamental to this is that it's used 100% for development, not evaluation. So if the person that's observing you as a superior or somebody who's involved in selecting coaches or those sorts of aspects, it's very difficult because we then want to self-present in a certain way. Yeah, because we're now going to be trying to present what we think they want to see and what they want to do. Yeah, which is human nature. It's what we do. So it's really important that this is purely developmental and this is your information and your data and used for your development only, not to the hierarchy, not to superiors. So especially when we do this work in the military, it's especially important because it's such a hierarchical organization that that data is protected. Nobody else sees that except the team and the coach or the instructor. That's our data. It's not used for anything else, and it's protected by the Data Protection Act that we adhere to in the British Psychological Society. So we cannot share that data. So a triangulation. I mean, it might be more than 3, but we've got athlete reports at the top. I put that at the top of the pyramid because I kind of hold that quite high value. Yeah, I kind of hold that because they're the people that we're affecting. So they're the people that are best able to judge us in some respects. Yeah, and it's not about liking. Yeah, it's not about whether the athlete likes you. They might not. Yeah, it's a bit more. It's a bit more important than that. It's a bit more complicated than that, unfortunately. So we've got our self-assessment, and I put supervisor, but it might be a coach in there. So then when we get numbers that we can now compare, we can now say, this is where I think I'm at, this is where my athletes, this is where my coach is, this is where my peer observer is. Now we can start working with something. We've now kind of got some information, we know what's important, and we're now getting some idea on, okay, so these sorts of things might be worthwhile working on. Yeah, and if there's a big discrepancy between what you're doing and what the athletes are picking up on or what you think you're doing, then you think, okay, how do we address that? Yeah, if I think I'm doing this real well, but my students, the athletes, whoever I'm with, they don't see that, I need to behave in a slightly different way or speak in a different way so that kind of balances up a little bit. So that's the next stage. Okay, sorry. So just a pictorial representation of this. Yeah, so what you might end up is with some graphs. This is your reports. This is athlete. This is a supervisor type report or coach or whoever it is in here. You can have more in here. Remember, the athlete, usually it's not an individual athlete. It can, depending on the sport, obviously, but it's an average of the team. If it's an individual athlete, they have to work a bit differently with this because their data is now identifiable, and they might not want to say bad things about you because they know you're going to see it. So really important that when we do this process, that the quality of the data is absolutely robust. And that's not trivial, okay? It's not a trivial. When I'm doing this in organizations, it's, I spend a long time explaining to the people, to the followers, to the athletes, to whoever it is, the importance of the quality of this data and that they're honest and that they're not going to be identified within this data set. Yeah, because we want to remove all that social desirability out of this data. Yeah, so it's not trivial, it's difficult, but that's kind of what we do as researchers. We're specialists in getting good quality data. Okay, now the last thing we do in this process is, okay, so what are we going to work on? What are the 3 things as a coach that we're going to work on in the next month, 2 months? Obviously, this is determined by your particular cycle. Like, if the Commonwealth Games are in a few weeks, so obviously this isn't the time for your development. Yeah, so you need to sort of time that in there. So we try and get those behaviors into here, and I'd say a maximum of 3. 3 is maybe too much, depending what it is and depending where you're at. But you're choosing what to do because you are the expert in your field. You know your coaching, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses more than anybody else does. So this is your data, okay? So then, classic goal setting. Where are we at now? We need to know where we're at right now, because we need to measure it. Motivation, if we're not getting better, motivation is very difficult to sustain. So we need to, we need to be able to measure and be able to assess and determine if we're making progress. If we're making no progress, or progress is indiscernible, we stop behaving. We don't do that anymore. And then we have our desired level, a date by which we want that to be achieved by, and then this box here, we have the actions. So what are we going to do? What things are we going to do differently? What knowledge might we need? What things are we going to practice? Remember, you're practicing stuff. Yeah, you get to practice as well as the athletes get to practice, yeah? So you're practicing different bits and pieces. So you might try out something. I mean, it is difficult because your practice has a direct impact on the athletes there. Okay, so, what are you going to do? Are you going to, sometimes, a coach might be really good at something that you're not. Just go and watch them. Try and just go and have a look, go and watch their sessions, go and do different stuff, go and, maybe read books, or I don't know. It depends exactly what you've identified in there. But it's important that we have actions. If we don't have actions, nothing changes. Yeah, if we just kind of keep putting to the side things that we're maybe not quite so good at, we're not really going to progress in that area. Okay, so the final stage is, how are we going to know if we've improved? Again, we know in athletes, we know in fitness, we know in skills that are more physiological, we know improvement, we can see it, we've got a stopwatch, we've got physical attributes, we've got things that we can do, but psychology is not quite as easy as that. So it's rerunning this exercise, maybe around about where your date is. Yeah, where you say, okay, in 3 months, this is what we're going to do, this is where I want to be. So you sit down, reflect, and give your self-assessment, maybe an athlete assessment, and see if what you've been trying has worked. If it has, great, tick it off, move on to the next thing. It's a continual process of development. If it hasn't, okay, how can we tweak it? What can we do differently next time? What things can I try? Okay, I've tried doing this, didn't quite work. Can I do something a bit different? Can I do something that I've not tried before? Who can I speak to that might be able to help me? Who's there that's available? And then it's just an ongoing process, so you develop your own personal development plan. As probably athletes have their own development plans and their progress reports and all these numbers that we produce for them and those sorts of things. But this is your personal process, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that it's not for assessment. It's for your development. Yeah, it's not. As soon as this process gets paired with selection, gets paired with some sort of formal assessment strategy, it doesn't work. It's no longer developmental. It's now assessment. They're two totally different things. They don't mix. Assessment and development. Or formal assessment. Okay, so just a summary. So I've worked you quite hard there, I think. But just the basic summary of the model, of what this process we went through, and we can repeat this and go round and do, and actually it's not just a start place, but it needs to continue and develop and go on. Okay, so I'm going to finish there. So if we want to take any questions, I'm not sure what the best way to do that is.
Questions? Fragen? Gleich heiße Fragen noch? Ja. Kannst du schnell das Mikrofon hin?
Thank you. I just have a technical question about the measurements.
Yep.
If you take the point of the athletes,
yep.
If you have 3 or 4, do you first make a consensus that you have one middle position of the athletes, or do you the triangulation every time with one of the athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's a difficult one, and your context will define that. Yeah, so what I'd always try and do if we're in a sport that's more of a one-on-one situation, it creates additional problems with this process. Yeah, because the athlete is now identifiable, so they know that they're scoring you. They know that you're getting this information. So there could be an issue with that. Whereas if you're working with teams, there's maybe 15 athletes or 10 athletes. But what I'd always try and do is to try and get more than one athlete and get the average. Yep, so if there's 10 athletes, they'll all fill out the process, and then you get an average from all your athletes. Yeah, and then with that average, you'll also get a standard deviation. So if the standard deviation is very large, which indicates a large spread of scores of how your athletes are rating you, you can use that information as well. But yeah, it's a good question. Good question.
Noch eine Frage? Ja, hier vorne.
Yesterday you have shown us these 7, what was it? Sorry. The 7 measurable, observable behaviors.
Yep.
And how does this relate to what we have set up with these questions in the first question? What is important? You can make a link in between these two things.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so those 7 behaviors that we talked about yesterday are talked about from the literature. Yeah, so that's what the research, the generic performance literature would suggest that are important, okay? But as we said, that those 7 behaviors or this research hasn't actually been done in your sport. It ignores your knowledge. The literature ignores a lot of what your experiences are. And what we're trying to do here is to marry up those processes. So those 7 behaviors, we could just say, okay, this is what we're going to use. This is what we're going to define. But they might not be important in your sport. So you know, so if they're not important in your sport, then well, there's no point in using them. Yeah. So I'd imagine that maybe a couple of them appeared on your list, or maybe not. Yeah. It's kind of used as a starting place to help us to think about things in different ways, to help categorize those behaviors. But yeah, it's a difficult. I'm not going to stand here and say you must do all 7 of those behaviors all the time. It doesn't make any sense for that. Now, if you do those 7 behaviors at a high level, you're probably going to be quite effective. You know, you're probably going to be in that situation. But yeah, we're trying to marry up the literature with your knowledge. Because you are the experts in your area. You are the experts in your sport. You know what happens in your environment. You know the culture. You live it. You breathe it. You have done for your whole lives. And we want to make use of that information for your sport. You might be sat there and go, actually, I'm just going to use those 7 behaviors, and that's what I'm going to use. That's absolutely fine. It's your choice. Yeah, you decide if these are more useful than what you're coming up with from the literature. Does that kind of... Good, thank you.
Noch eine weitere letzte Frage? Jawohl.
To define what is important at the first point, your question was, think about the best coach that you have ever had. And I'm quite astonished because you think what is good for you, not what is good for the other. So what...
Yeah. Yeah, no, good, that's a great point. So, and this is one of the factors that makes your job as coaches one of the most difficult jobs you can have, because you have individuals with different personalities, with different beliefs, with different experiences, different levels. So what we necessarily like isn't what other people necessarily like, but it's a starting place. Yeah, it's to start that process of self-reflection, because there's probably some things that all human beings like across the board. You know, some things like we like to feel good at stuff. We like to feel competent. You know, we like to feel, although we're effective in what we do. Yeah, we want to feel valued. We want other people to value us. So there's certain things that are generic across human nature, but then there's a whole field of psychological research that is exactly that. It's individual differences. So it's different personalities, different contexts, different situations. So this is a starting place. And just to try and start that process and to try and generate some ideas and get the self-reflection working, but then we move on to that. So we adapt that into that situation. So unfortunately, there is no one golden pill that we can take that's going to solve all the problems. Yeah, there's no one thing. It's an ongoing process of development. But yeah, it's a great point. Just because we like something doesn't mean our athletes are going to like something. And one of the real dangers of this process that I probably should have talked about is that when we look back to the past, we tend to look through these tinted glasses. We have this sort of filter that filters out some of the more negative experiences that we've maybe had. Yeah, so we have this filter, so we tend to view things more positively from the past. You know, I'll try and explain it. So I like to do a bit of climbing, sort of in the mountains, and I used to like to push myself when I was younger, and now I just like doing long mountain routes on traditional gear, so you don't really want to fall. And I remember being on this climb. I was probably about 18 or 19, and in Scotland, there's a mountain called the Buccleuch Moor. It's probably a 6-pitch cliff, so it's about 300 meters, and it's quite challenging for me at that particular time. And I remember being very, 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 very scared. I had a long way out of my rope, and if I'd fallen off, it was going to be a real serious fall. And I was proper scared. There was no bolts. It was all traditional things you had to put in the wall, like nuts and cams and things. And I remember saying, if I get out of this, I'm never going to climb again. If I get to the top, please let me get to the top. I'm never going to climb again. And then I managed to get through it, obviously, because I'm here. And I got to the top, and what an amazing feeling. And I kind of forget that negative aspect because I still go climbing. But at that particular moment, that emotion was real strong. So when we look back at things, we don't always have a perfect recollection of actually what happened. It gets filtered by different processes. So that's another sort of caveat on this process that we went through there. So, yeah, good question. Thank you.
Gut. Noch was ganz Wichtiges? Sonst, thank you very much.
Thank you.